major oil companies and many of the major multinationals. That trust is in joint control of the Rockefeller Foundation and the European interests.
Bank trust controls both the Rockefeller Foundation, controls the Federal Reserve, and it's the method whereby they were able to gain control of the currency of the United States of America back in 1913 through the Federal Reserve, which no one else can do because those trusts are no longer allowed.
The deal cut with the Saudis and the Kuwaitis and the Middle Eastern people was that they should put their money in the prime banks. They did not know that the prime banks were able to lend 20 to 1, I think it is in this country, but maybe more now, but their revenues, all they were receiving was the interest on the money they deposited.
Now, the Arabs did not realize that fractional reserve banking could be practiced by these banks. They did not understand banking. Remember, they had just been nomads on the deserts not too long ago. But through this, the international bankers were able to gain the control of the money of the Arab world, and the Arab world only received back the interest off of the money that they had put into the international bankers' banks under these 30-year time deposits.
Between 10 and 30 years, receiving the principal at the end of the term. Because they had locked-in deposits, the banks were then able to make loans to the third world nations.
Now, through the funds that they had gained from the Arabs, which was directly related to the increase of oil prices, through a manipulation that had been made with the Arab world, and taking the price of your gasoline from 30 cents a gallon to $1.20 a gallon, now with this money coming back into the international bankers' banks, they take those funds, which originally came from you and from me, and invested them in the third world countries. You do remember, 15, 20 years ago, when the international bankers started investing in third world country loans. The countries that are going broke today, they invested back then. But they wanted those countries to go broke, and here is that part of the story.
Knowing and relying on the greed of the ministers of these nations to mishandle that money over the years to the extent where that manipulated greed has caused those countries to be in the position they're in.
They wanted those third world countries to go broke. You'll remember about the time that most of the third world countries were getting their independence, independence from England, independence from France, independence from America, and they were setting up their own governments. Now, he said at that point the international bankers loaned them these large sums of money which had come to them through the Arabs as a result of their oil prices. At this point, the international bankers wanted the third world countries to misuse those funds. They intended for them to go broke. It was part of the plan for those third world countries to squander the funds. Remember that the new leaders of these countries themselves had never governed any country before. They knew very little even about government. They had only been colonial countries under some other country. So the international bankers knew that their leaders would squander the money that was being given to them, which international bankers had taken from the Arabs and just from you originally through oil prices, and now here is where it goes.
In 1981, I was exposed to trying to help the Hunt brothers in Texas because they, with John Connolly, who was then the governor of Texas, who was also then the Undersecretary of the Treasury, had secretly tried to implement a currency, a new currency for Texas, since Texas is only a part of the Union by treaty, which is automatically renewed every year, but not necessarily automatically renewed every year. It's become a tradition, obviously, that it's renewed every year, but it's actually not renewed every year.
Did you know that Texas is not a state by vote, such as other states, but a state by treaty? I see one head shaking here on the front. Texas is a state by treaty, not by vote. Now, you must know that Texas at one time became very wealthy, and independent individuals such as the Hunt brothers, who years ago were nothing, but they were made rich overnight through the wealth of oil in Texas when oil was first struck and became so popular in the early days. Texas being the place where the Hunt brothers lived, and John Connally being the governor of Texas at one time, and you remember was in the limousine with John F. Kennedy when he was shot, and they tried to shoot Connally also, but he went down the floorboard of the vehicle and lived through it to tell it. Well, there's a story behind why John Connally was attempted to be assassinated, and while the Hunt brothers today are bankrupt, men that were multi-billionaires 15 years ago were some of the wealthiest men in the world, the Hunt brothers. And today, I was just in Dallas, Texas a few weeks ago, my wife and I, and an individual who was a friend of ours met with the Hunt brothers. They are in court right now in the process of attempting to stall off financial bankruptcy. They have been bankrupted by the internationalists. And the reason that the Hunt brothers are being broken today is because the internationalists knew what the Hunt brothers and Connally, former governor of Texas, were trying to do. Texas being a state by treaty, not by vote, anytime that Texas wishes to, they cannot renew their treaty for that year and could legally secede from the Union. And the Hunt brothers and John Connally knew that Texas had the ability of setting up their own country, having their own currency, and being solvent and not under the dictates of the Federal Reserve or the bureaucracy in Washington, and they were in the process of gaining a corner on the silver of the world in order to be able to finance a process whereby they could overcome the international bankers. And at that point, the Hunt brothers were broken. John Connally was almost killed, and Texas, who could have been the only state in the Union to fulfill it, had some major problems. And today, Dallas and Fort Worth, Texas, you ride through the cities and you would vow and declare that it was almost a ghost town in certain areas. Storefronts are closed. People have moved out of $150,000, $200,000 homes. The internationalists became so angry at what Texas had done until they broke the back of the oil industry and the major oil producers of Texas, and it was all by a design plan, and we go further.
And the intention was that Texas was going to create its own money. The Hunts were in partnership with the Shah of Iran, a German banker and an Austrian banker. The Federal Reserve Board got to hear about it. The Hunts were buying silver irresponsibly because they had one man doing both buying and selling on the same floors of all the exchanges, and word got out. And the result of that was that the German banker was murdered. You may remember the Bader-Meinhof terrorists at the time who only actually ever murdered one person, although a lot of industrialists were captured and held to ransom and various other things. Only one actually man, which was a banker, ever got murdered, and it was that banker that was the partners of the Hunts.
Hunt brothers of Texas and a banker were attempting to do this. He said that one was killed, the Shah of Iran was deposed, and the Hunt brothers today are filing for bankruptcy. You see what the internationalists can do whenever you attempt to thwart their plan.
The Austrian banker was so badly beaten up that he'll never get out of a mental institution. And the Hunts, you know what happened to them. They're virtually bankrupt today, despite the fact that they had about 16 billion in worth at the time. The Shah was perfectly healthy when he left Iran. He was only declared sick when he arrived in America, held in, quote, protective custody, unquote, in U.S. military bases where he was treated.
The Shah of Iran was in perfect health when he left Iran. When he came here, they saw to it that he died. You know, it can very easily be done by chemical and germ warfare. The rest of the story of the deposing of the Shah of Iran is dared to be printed in my latest book, Syndrome of Control. Congressman George Hansen tells the story. You'll remember that Congressman Hansen was in the House of Representatives in Washington. He heard what was happening in Iran and wanted to investigate. Congress would not let him go. This story, by the way, is told minute by minute, hour by hour in this book for the first time in copyrighted form. You'll want to get it and read it for yourself. He went to Iran, paid his own airline ticket to go over. When he got there, the Khomeini gave him an audience. The Khomeini said, "We don't want these hostages any more than you want us to have them." That wasn't what we were told by the media, was it? Khomeini said, I would like to give you 1/2 of the hostages to take home with you tomorrow morning if you will promise to start an investigation into the relationship between the Shah of Iran, Chase Manhattan Bank, Henry Kissinger, and President Carter. Congressman Hansen called back to someone in Congress whose name he mentions in this book and says, I can bring 1/2 of the hostages home tomorrow. Would you like me to? He said, I'll call you back tomorrow and tell you. Would you believe America held hostage while he says we'll call you back tomorrow and tell you whether you can bring them home or not? The next day the call came back. Congressman Hansen was told, get on the next airplane, come home, don't bring any hostages with you, do not do any negotiating. You have no right to speak on the part of the Congress of the United States of America, even though you are a congressman. Get home immediately.